Well, if you're buying a house or selling one, you definitely need a home inspector. Real estate expert and After 6 contributor Blair Buchanan is back with us in studio to talk about why it's so important to have a home inspector. And you know what? I say a home inspector so that they can do a home inspection. And Blair, we've talked about this in the past on Dan's show.
Yes.
And it really is valuable to have a home inspector come in, specifically if you, first of all, are buying a home, an older home for that matter.
That's right. Older or newer, but particularly for an older home, it's critically important to have a home inspection done. It is the best money you will ever spend on a house, is that home inspection, which will determine whether or not you're going to proceed with the purchase of that home. Very, very important.
And so normally how it works is somebody is selling their home, you tell your real estate agent, I'm interested in purchasing that home, you go through, you check it out, you say I want to put in an offer, and that's where you would then say we need to hire a home inspector too?
That's right. We're normally offers in the Durham region and throughout Ontario really are going to have two conditions in them, mainly two conditions. The conditions would be conditional on getting a mortgage for about 5 banking days is typical, and conditional on getting a home inspection also for about 5 days. Now you can shorten up that period if you have to, but generally you leave about 5 days for this to happen so that once the deal is negotiated and you have bought the house conditionally on a home inspection, you can contact the home inspector, set it up for the next day or 2 or 3 days later to go through. It's very important that the buyer goes through the home inspection process with the home inspector. I will not sell a house to people who are not going to be present at the home inspection. It is very important that they be there because it's very educational.
And so Blair, you've hired the home inspector, and again you can get that through your real estate agent. They'll let you know some credible ones. That's
right. That's right. There are many very good home inspectors in the Durham region, and there's an association of home inspectors. They have to pass fairly stringent educational requirements to become one, and you want somebody with a track record, and they will explain to you over the phone what their charge is going to be and the scope of what they can do. So for instance, you know, if it's a snowy day, they won't be able to get up on the roof, which typically they would do on a day that isn't snowy. So there are some limitations caused by weather, for instance. But generally speaking, it's you'll understand that as the buyer before you go in.
And so what are some of the things that the home inspector looks for?
Sure. The home inspector is basically looking at 5 kind of systems in a house. First of all, they're looking at the foundation. And yeah, they're looking for cracks in foundations and you know, unusual settlement and that type of thing. They're also looking at the grading, you know, the soil around the foundation, and does it, you know, kind of slope towards the foundation, which isn't good, or should it be sloping away, which of course is much better to get the water away. Cracks in foundations are not uncommon. They're not something that people should be, you know,
concerned with that.
Well, they should be concerned always, but never. It's not usually what we call a deal breaker.
Okay.
A good home inspector will determine the kind of crack that is in the foundation, and if it's a certain kind of crack, it can be filled with epoxy under pressure, and that usually solves the problem 100% of the time. And it's not really a big deal. You know, you'd rather have a foundation without cracks, but occasionally you have a couple, and it's not a real big deal. So long as it keeps the water out. And these epoxy compounds now, usually they dig the house down a little bit on the outside. Not very expensive. I'm going to say around between $400 to $800 to have a crack filled properly by a professional.
And of course, when we're talking about the outside, they also take a look at the roof in
yes,
unit and see how that is.
So after the foundation, you know, they're going to look at the structure in general, which includes the roof. Very important, because the roof, you know, very few people actually go up onto their roof to kind of look at it. You know, first of all, it's fear. Secondly, they don't have the ladder and the equipment and so on. So, you know, the home inspector, they just clamber up there quickly, and they are around with their photographs. They're taking digital photographs all the time. The homeowner is standing down on the lawn looking around at their future backyard, and the home inspector's up on the roof. They're looking for things like blown away shingles, flashing around chimneys, flashing in the valleys that may be, you know, either old or you know, ready to leak or leaking existing. And you know, various things like that. They're going to check the chimney to make sure the mortar is all correct and so on. Then they're going to come down and they're going to look at the rest of the structure as best they can. So a finished basement, for instance, you won't be able to see much behind the finished drywall or paneling on a basement. So they can't see what the foundation's like or the structure if the ceiling is done. But because they're not allowed to kind of remove what is there that is owned by the homeowner,
okay,
you know, they can't cause damage to a house to inspect it. So they can only inspect what they can see and kind of prod around.
And inside they're looking for leaks and cracks?
That's right, and a home inspector is always going to carry a moisture meter, which is one of the most unique little devices, and they just literally can walk around and touch it against a wall, say, you know, a foot up from the basement floor, and it will read the moisture level. So if there was something behind that wall, they can generally kind of sense it through the moisture meter. And they're going to do the moisture meter all through the basement. And recently I had a home inspection where I noticed just a off-white color in the ceiling in the living room, and sure enough the inspector put the moisture meter up and it was an active leak that had just started from some flashing up on the roof. And if we hadn't seen the cloud of just slightly off color, we wouldn't have known, and instantly these moisture meters pick up the fact that there's a bit of dampness there. So they have the tools that kind of really answer the questions for the homeowner, and
right,
it's very important that they do that.
They also go up in the attic too, right, Blair?
Yeah, they go in the attic and they're looking for disturbed, well, they're looking for the structure first of all to make sure that everything's correct and not cracked and so on. And they're looking for disturbances in the insulation, maybe where there's been a storm that's blown insulation back up through the soffits and so on. So the insulation is very important, and where vents vent to. In older houses, quite often, bathroom vents, for instance, they would vent into the attic, and they wouldn't vent right through the attic, through the roof and outside, which is what they should do. So quite often you'll have an older home with a bit of condensation, because you're really venting warm air into an attic, which isn't good when the attic is freezing cold. So you're going to have some moisture and condensation and so on. So the home inspector knows to look for all of those things, which most homeowners don't know how to do. And so it's really important. So that you've done the foundation, the structure, and then you're going to get into the plumbing, the electrical, and the furnace. And a home inspector is qualified to look at all of those systems and determine that they're safe. Number one, electrical is really a big issue, particularly in older homes. If you have a very old home built, say, before 1920, you're going to have some knob and tube wiring possibly. There's nothing wrong with knob and tube wiring, except that insurance companies won't insure your house if it has a lot of it in it.
Okay.
Okay. They will insure your house, but they'll probably ask you to have it removed over a period of time. So those are the things that you run into with a very old house.
And I just going to say, and again, it's important to have a home inspector, because if you're going in and you don't, and say there are problems, I mean, those problems can amount to like $10,000, $20,000, or higher for that matter.
That's a really good point, because a home inspector will identify problems or potential problems and will say, from my experience, this roof, which needs to be replaced in about 5 or 6 years in my estimation, the home inspector will say this, will be between $3,000 and $4,000. So you should budget that amount when you redo the roof, that's how much cost you're going to be looking at. If you have to do a replacement of an electrical panel, it might cost $800 to $1,500 to do that. And so that the home inspector will educate the buyer to all of those costs, and they're pretty realistic costs.
And so important, because they can save you a lot of money in the end.
It's the best 3 hours, homeowners. I have never had a disappointed homeowner going through a home inspection process. They're amazed at what they learn.
Probably give you a hug and kiss at the end and say, thank you so much
for
saving us.
They give the home inspector the hug and the kiss.
Exactly. Yeah. Blair, thank you so much. And again, for more information, you can visit Blair's website, and you can also email him with your questions.
The Surrey-built cargo box for 2007, because it's the all-new design Sierra 2007 GMC, is 2 inches deeper.